The restaurant was called Aldovar. It was the kind of place where the lighting was kept deliberately low, the wine list was leather-bound and 12 pages long, and the people who ate there liked to believe that money, when handled correctly, could insulate a person from everything ordinary. Brett Langford, 41, commercial real estate broker, reserved a corner table every last Friday of the month. He had done it for 3 years. It was his table, in his restaurant, among his friends, and he made sure everyone understood exactly that. Simone Langford, 37, sat at the end of that table on a Friday in early November and said almost nothing for the first 40 minutes of dinner. She had driven herself. She had ordered sparkling water. She wore a gray blazer, no jewelry except a thin silver watch, and she was looking at something on her phone when Brett leaned across the white tablecloth, removed the phone from her hand without asking, and placed it face down beside her water glass. "You know what your problem is," he said, loud enough for the 4 other couples at the table to hear clearly. "You act like whatever you're doing on that thing matters more than the actual people sitting in front of you." He smiled when he said it. That was the part that settled into the room like smoke, the smile. Easy, practiced, designed to make the cruelty look casual. Simone looked at him. She didn't say anything. He picked up his wine glass, held it deliberately over her side of the table, and tipped it. Not all the way, not in a single dramatic gesture, but slowly, with the kind of patience that only exists when someone has already decided they will not be held accountable. The red wine ran off the edge of the glass and soaked into the front of her blazer in a dark, spreading bloom. There was a brief silence at the table. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else looked at their plate. Simone stood up, folded her cloth napkin twice with steady hands, and placed it beside her untouched plate. She picked up her phone, put it in her bag, and walked out of Aldovar without a single word to anyone. Brett called after her. It wasn't an apology. It was something worse than an apology. It was annoyance dressed up as concern. "Simone. Come on, Simone. You're embarrassing yourself." She was already through the door. If you're new here, welcome to this channel. This is where we sit with stories that are slow at the start and devastating at the end. Stories built around power, patience, and what happens when the wrong person is underestimated for the very last time. If this is the kind of storytelling that earns your time, please subscribe right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss what we put out. And drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Your city, your state, your country. We read every single one. Now, let's go back to Simone. To understand what Brett thought he was doing that night at Aldovar, you have to understand what he believed about his wife. He had met Simone 6 years earlier when she was a senior biotech analyst at a research firm in Charlotte. She was precise, self-contained, and earned a respectable living. Nothing approaching what he pulled in during a strong quarter, but enough that she never once asked him for anything. He had found her independence attractive in the beginning, the way certain men find a woman's competence charming when it exists beneath them. But competence has a tendency to grow, and Brett was not a man who grew alongside the people around him. He was a man who needed the ceiling to stay exactly where he'd placed it. When Simone left the research firm 2 years into their marriage to work independently, he had called it a phase. When she incorporated a private company she named Luminar Biopath, he had laughed and asked if she was selling vitamins. When she began spending 12 and 14 hours in her home office on weeks he didn't think were particularly busy, he called her detached, obsessive, difficult to live with. When she asked for uninterrupted time during a critical development period, he sat at that corner table at Aldovar and told his friends, loudly, that his wife had completely lost the thread of real life. He told that story with warmth in his voice and a glass of expensive wine in his hand, and the people around that table nodded sympathetically and refilled their glasses, because Brett Langford told the story well, and no one at that table had ever spent a serious evening with Simone. The version of his wife that Brett carried in his mind was clean and settled. She was failing in silence, too stubborn to admit it, keeping up appearances with a company that existed mostly on paper, while quietly depending on his income to maintain the life they shared. It was the story he needed. It wasn't close to the truth. What Brett did not know, because Simone had not told him, and because he had never once thought to look, was the actual scale of what she had been building inside Luminar Biopath for the past 3.5 years. Luminar was not a vitamin company. It was not a side project or a passion exercise. It was a tightly structured biotech licensing firm built around a proprietary data integration platform that Simone had spent years developing alongside a former research colleague named Owen Strauss, now her co-founder. The platform did something specific, unglamorous, and enormously valuable. It streamlined real-time genomic data processing for pharmaceutical clinical trials in a way that cut validation timelines by nearly 40%. The largest drug manufacturers in the country had been losing tens of millions per year to the problem Luminar had quietly solved. Simone had 3 active enterprise contracts, a patent portfolio in final review, and something else entirely that Brett had zero awareness of: a $500 million acquisition offer from a publicly traded pharmaceutical group called Renwick Darrow, sitting in final negotiation and scheduled to close within the week. The deal had been in motion for 11 months. It was the only thing she thought about when she wasn't in that restaurant pretending to eat dinner. She drove home from Aldovar that night with the wine still cold and damp against her ribs, her phone open to a message thread from Dana Reeves, 39, her attorney. Dana had been her friend since their early 20s, sharp and deliberate in the way that made her excellent at her job and occasionally difficult at dinner parties. She had been Simone's personal counsel for 4 years, and she was the only person outside the Renwick Darrow transaction team who understood the full picture: the company, the deal, and the marriage. The message on Simone's screen was brief. Final documents came through at 9. Everything is clean. Call me when you're home. Simone called her from the driveway, still in the car, still in the ruined blazer. She told Dana what had happened at the restaurant in 4 sentences. Dana was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm finished," Simone said. Not dramatically. The way someone says it when they mean it completely. 2 years earlier, when Simone had first recognized what her marriage was becoming, when the dismissiveness stopped being occasional and became a climate, she had not gone to Dana to discuss divorce proceedings. She had gone to Dana to discuss protection. She sat in Dana's office on a Wednesday afternoon in October, laid out exactly what she was building at Luminar and exactly what she was watching deteriorate at home, and asked a single, carefully framed question. If this company becomes worth something significant, what is the legal exposure? Dana had taken 2 weeks to research the answer properly. What she came back with was a structure that was legally sound, professionally defensible, and entirely invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. The intellectual property at the core of Luminar Biopath had originated from research Simone began and documented before the marriage, development history preserved in time-stamped files, correspondence, and independent records going back nearly 5 years. The equity structure of the company was held through a revocable trust that predated the marriage by 14 months, with Simone as sole beneficiary. Simone had contributed her personal income to joint living expenses throughout the marriage. She had been a full financial partner in their shared life. But Luminar, its equity, its ownership, its licensing revenue, and the entire value of the pending Renwick Darrow acquisition sat inside a clean, separate legal category that had no connection to the marital estate. In the event of divorce, Brett's attorneys could fight. They could argue, theorize, file motions, and spend significant money on experts. And they would get the house equity split, a calculated portion of Simone's earned consulting income across the years of the marriage, and nothing beyond that. Not 1 share of Luminar. Not $1 of the acquisition. The structure was airtight. Dana had built it to be. Simone had known about this protection for over a year. She had gone to work. She had come home. She had sat at that corner table at Aldovar and said almost nothing while her husband performed for his friends. She had waited, not because she was afraid, but because she understood that the timing of a decision like this was not something to rush. If you're still watching at this point in the story, type the word patient in the comments right now, because that's exactly what Simone was. Patient. And we're about to see why that mattered more than anything else. The 4 days between the Aldovar dinner and the closing were the quietest of Simone's professional life, which was strange, because they were also the most consequential. She met with Dana on Monday morning in Dana's downtown Charlotte office, and the two of them spent nearly 3 hours reviewing the final Renwick Darrow documents spread across the conference table. The valuation had held. The structure was exactly what had been negotiated. The closing was Thursday at 10 in the morning. Simone's net position, structured across upfront cash and vested Renwick Darrow equity at current share price, was $514 million. Dana set down the last document and looked at her across the table. "How are you holding up?" she asked. And the question was not about the acquisition. Simone considered it honestly. "I'm ready," she said. "I've been ready for a while." They spent the rest of the morning on the personal side. Simone told Dana she had decided. She had not made this decision in the car on Friday night, or even in the weeks before. She had arrived at it the same way she had arrived at most important decisions in her life, slowly, thoroughly, without drama. She wanted to file on Thursday afternoon, after the closing documents were signed and Renwick Darrow had formally executed the transfer. She did not want to file before. She wanted there to be no appearance of timing, no suggestion of concealment, no angle for Brett's future attorneys to construct a narrative around. She wanted the sequence to be clean. Deal closes, marriage ends. Both facts become public in the same news cycle, and she is already somewhere else entirely. Dana understood. She had the divorce filing prepared and ready to go. Brett spent that same week doing what Brett always did. He worked his territory, had lunches, sent Simone 2 text messages that she did not answer, and by Wednesday had apparently decided she was being dramatic and had moved on. He mentioned to a mutual acquaintance that Simone was going through something, and that he was giving her space. He had already reauthored the story. Thursday morning, Simone drove to the offices of Hartfield and Crane in uptown Charlotte, where the Renwick Darrow transaction team had assembled for closing. There were 12 people in the room: attorneys, deal advisors, Renwick Darrow's general counsel, Owen Strauss sitting beside her with his own representation. She signed her name in 9 places across a 47-page document package. At 11:22 in the morning, Renwick Darrow's general counsel confirmed receipt, and the deal was formally executed. Owen shook her hand, and then pulled her into a brief, genuine hug. Nobody made a speech. They didn't need to. At 2:15 that afternoon, Dana filed the divorce petition with the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. Grounds: irreconcilable differences. Property division framework attached. The Luminar equity structure was disclosed fully, documented in 26 pages of supporting exhibits. Everything visible, nothing hidden, exactly as designed. By 3:40 in the afternoon, Renwick Darrow's public relations team issued a press release. It was the standard language of major pharmaceutical acquisitions, strategic alignment, expanded capabilities, accelerated pipeline development. In the 4th paragraph, it identified the acquisition target, named the founder, and listed the transaction value. Simone Langford, founder and CEO of Luminar Biopath, $514 million. The news moved quickly. By the time the Charlotte business press picked it up that evening, it had already been shared across 3 regional biotech newsletters and flagged by 2 national trade publications. By Friday morning, a financial reporter at a mid-sized national outlet had turned it into a longer feature story. The specific human detail that made it irresistible to readers was right there in the public record. The founder's divorce petition had been filed the same afternoon as the deal closing. The story wrote itself. Woman builds $500 million company during her marriage. Files for divorce the day it closes. The headline was not subtle. Brett Langford found out the way most people find out about things now. Someone sent him a link. He was in his car, in the parking structure beneath his brokerage office, reading it on his phone, and the particular quality of that moment. Sitting alone in a concrete structure in the middle of the afternoon, reading about his wife's company in a news article he had not known existed, is something only he can fully describe. His attorney received a call from him within the hour. The attorney reviewed the filings Dana had prepared and called Brett back 20 minutes later with information he did not want to hear. The equity was premarital. The trust was clean. The structure was documented and defensible. There was no viable claim against the acquisition proceeds. "What do I have?" Brett asked him. His attorney told him. It was not $500 million. It was not close. The thing about Aldovar is that it had a reputation for discretion. People in Charlotte's business community had quiet, significant conversations there for years, and the staff maintained the kind of professional silence that a certain clientele pays to depend on. But restaurants have servers, and servers have phones, and the night of the wine, the slow, deliberate pour over a woman in a gray blazer who didn't say a single word on her way out the door, had been witnessed by enough people at that corner table that the story had already circulated in certain circles before the acquisition made the news. Once the acquisition hit, the two stories found each other the way stories always find each other in small professional communities, fast and without mercy. By Saturday, there was a thread on a local business forum that someone had posted anonymously. It detailed the dinner at Aldovar in specific, accurate terms. It did not editorialize. It simply described what had happened: the phone taken from her hand, the wine, the smile, the exit, and then it linked to the acquisition announcement. The thread had 460 comments by Sunday morning. Most of them said the same thing in different words. She knew the whole time. Simone spent that weekend at a rented apartment she had quietly arranged 3 weeks earlier, a clean 2-bedroom in a building she had driven past twice before choosing. She had brought 2 bags and her laptop. She had not told Brett where she was. She was not required to. She made coffee on Saturday morning and sat at a small table by the window and did something she had not done in a long time. She sat quietly, in her own space, with nothing requiring her attention. The phone was nearby. She did not look at it for almost an hour. When she finally picked it up, there were 47 messages from numbers she recognized and several she didn't. She read Dana's first. "The filing was picked up this morning. His attorney reached out. He wants to discuss settlement terms. I told them to put it in writing and give us 2 weeks. You okay?" Simone set the phone down on the table and looked out the window at the Saturday morning street below. The coffee shop's opening. A man walking a dog with the particular unhurried pace of someone with nowhere to be. A woman in a yellow coat crossing at the light, with a paper bag tucked under one arm. Ordinary and clean, and entirely separate from the thing she had spent the last 3 years building in silence. She felt something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite satisfaction, but existed somewhere in the territory between them. She had known for a long time how this would end. She had simply had to remain patient enough to let it arrive. She picked up the phone and typed back to Dana. "I'm okay. 2 weeks is fine. Don't rush anything." Then she made a second cup of coffee, and she sat back down at the table by the window, and she watched the street, and she did not think about Aldovar or Brett, or the look on his face when someone sent him that link in a parking garage. She had already spent enough of herself on all of that. The morning was too quiet and too hers to spend it any other way. Brett Langford's attorney made 3 separate attempts to challenge the Luminar equity structure over the following weeks. Each one was answered by documentation that Dana had spent 2 years ensuring existed. The premarital development records, the trust formation date, the time-stamped intellectual property history. Every angle closed before it could fully open. The divorce was uncontested within 60 days. The settlement Brett received was exactly what the law provided for, and not a dollar beyond it. He sold his Aldovar table reservation 3 months later. The restaurant had lost some of its quiet appeal. Owen Strauss sent Simone a bottle of wine after the settlement was finalized, a good one, the kind worth spending money on. He included a card that said only, "You built something real. Glad I got to be part of it." She kept the card. She opened the wine that evening with Dana, and the two of them sat on the small balcony of the rented apartment, now no longer a rental but a purchase, and talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with any of this. That is the detail that stays with me most about Simone Langford. Not the $500 million, not the airtight legal structure, not the 3 years of silence while her husband performed at his corner table. It's the fact that on the evening she finally closed the door on all of it, the thing she chose to do was sit with a friend she trusted and talk about something else entirely. That kind of peace is not an accident. It is the specific reward of a person who decided, quietly and early, that she would not let someone else's smallness determine the size of her life. She had made her choice long before he poured that wine. He just never thought she was the type to make one. If this story stayed with you, if you felt something watching Simone hold her ground through all of it, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We put out stories like this regularly, and we would genuinely love for you to be part of the community we're building here. Leave a comment below telling us what you think. Did Simone do the right thing by waiting as long as she did? Or should she have moved sooner? There is no wrong answer, and the conversation in the comments on stories like this one is always worth reading. We'll see you in the next one.